Okay, so let's talk about compounds. What is a compound? All right, here comes the definition. A compound is a pure substance made of two or more elements that are chemically bonded or chemically combined. We're going to talk about this term right here that I underlined, pure substance. We'll talk about that just a little bit later. All right, so here we have sodium, we have chlorine. If we chemically combine them or chemically bond those atoms, we get a new substance called salt, and this substance is a compound. So here we have an element plus an element, and sometimes when those go through a chemical reaction, they can form a compound. In this case, our compound is salt. Okay, here we go. Again, we have sodium, and chlorine is going to give us salt at the end. And how do we know that it's a compound? How do we know that something has changed? Well, the properties are going to change. Right? With sodium, it's a metal. It reacts with water. It's soft and shiny. Chlorine is a poisonous gas at room temperature. And when we combine those two, we get something with completely different properties. We get crystalline solid salt. It's a solid, it's white, it tastes delicious. Anyway, its properties are very different than the properties of sodium or the properties of chlorine. Okay, so here I have an atom of sodium. It has 11 protons and 11 electrons, so same number of protons, the same number of electrons. Also in the nucleus we have 12 neutrons in this atom, and we have an atom with a model of an atom of chlorine, and chlorine would have 17 protons, 17 electrons, again balanced number of protons and electrons, and in the nucleus we also have 18 neutrons. So what's happening here with when we have some chemical reactions going on, chemical bonding? You can see chlorine has 7 valence electrons, and so it's missing just 1 valence electron to have that outer energy shell full. On the other hand, sodium has 1 valence electron, so it's missing 7 valence electrons to have that outer energy full. And so what will happen to form this chemical substance, this compound? Sodium will give its electron away and give it to chlorine, getting rid of that outer energy level altogether. So its new outer energy level will be the second one with 8 electrons. And now chlorine has a full 8 shell valence, 8 shell electron, or 8, what did I say? 8 electron shell full of valence electrons. So the result, this compound is a new substance with different properties. Okay, some examples of compounds. We have water, and its chemical formula is H2O. We have hydrogen peroxide, that's that stuff that you pour on cuts that bubbles and foams, causing a chemical reaction. Its formula is very similar to water's. Its formula is H2O2, and delicious sugar cubes here with a formula of C6H12O6. Okay, back to our examples here. Water. Now you can see that water is made up of 2 different elements, H and O, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. Hydrogen peroxide also has 2 different elements but in different combinations, 2 hydrogens, 2 oxygens. Sugar has 3 different elements, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, or 6 oxygens. And our little friend here, salt, sodium, and chlorine, 1 atom of sodium for every atom of chlorine. Okay, so let's talk about, from the definition, the term pure substance. When we talked about elements before, we talked about how elements were a pure substance. They were made up of 1 type of atom. And here we have a model of, if we could take a microscope and look at the individual atoms of an element, let's say an element of helium, for example, we would see that all of the atoms were very, very similar. They all looked alike. The difference, though, between an element and a compound, compounds are also a pure substance, but a compound will have 2 different types of atoms that are chemically bonded or chemically combined, and we show this by having them touch each other. So here we have sodium chloride or salt, and here's another example of water. You can see the little water molecules. Sometimes they call them Mickey Mouse molecules because the hydrogens go on one side of the oxygen. And you can see that the water molecules have two different colors. They're touching each other. That's one way to know that it is a compound instead of an element. Another way to know that it's a compound instead of an element, well, remember we talked about elements. Elements have what's called a chemical symbol. And this chemical symbol has one capital letter, and sometimes it will have one or two lowercase letters with it. And we know that each element has a unique symbol. Well, if you have two or more chemical symbols attached to each other, you would know that because you would have two or more capital letters, such as the N and the C. Then, if that's the case, you have a chemical formula. And you can see water has a capital H and a capital O. And if we looked at sugar has C6H12O6. So it has three elements that are chemically combined together. And we know this because we have three capital letters. So that's another way to figure out if it's a compound versus an element.